There are a lot of moral hazards to being a diplomat. For example, if you work in the Canadian embassy in China for even just a few years, you are working for the interests of Canada, supposedly. But the minute you're done, your ability to sell your services to either side of that equation in the private sector is enormous. Imagine saying to a Canadian investor into China, hey, I know the ropes. I have all these connections from being a diplomat in Beijing. Or imagine saying the opposite. Imagine saying to the Chinese side, well, I am connected in Canada. I know how the embassy works. I know how the security side works, the trade side works. That is a moral hazard, an ethical hazard. It's one of the problems of the foreign ministry, and it was ever thus. But what about people who go beyond ethical questions? I mean, by the way, if you're wondering if that ever happened, I put it to you that Jean Chrétien, when he retired as prime minister, within 6 weeks went to work as a lobbyist for communist China. Do you remember that? Anyways, what about people, though, who can't wait till they're retired before selling their connections and influence? What about diplomats who literally start selling influence or embezzling or selling visas while they work for the government? Joining us now to talk about this and the number of diplomats who have been fired for it is our friend Franco Terrazzano, the boss of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He joins us now via Ottawa. Franco, good to see you.
Hey, Ezra, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You know, I really think of that Beijing embassy because that was the starting point of so many lucrative careers for consultants. But what we're talking about here is something more dastardly, actual crimes. Tell us a little bit of the story that our friends at Blacklocks broke this morning.
Yeah, well, shout out to Blacklocks. I mean, they're doing some great investigative journalist work, right? Showing you how governments are wasting and spending your money. And like, look, this is gross. I really felt sick to my stomach reading this story, just knowing how hard Canadians work for the money they earn and the taxes they pay. And meanwhile, you have 22 Canadian diplomats that were fired, okay? Some of the allegations or some of the reporting that Blacklocks looked into, by the way, from records from the Department of Foreign Affairs, soliciting kickbacks. Gross. Yeah. Falsifying receipts so that they can claim allowances. Misusing government-issued fuel cards, falsifying travel expenses. I mean, this really is some gross stuff that was reported by Blacklocks. And again, they're just reporting what was in reports from the Department of Foreign Affairs itself.
You know, there's 4 words in this story that I think are even worse than what you've described. Let me read the first 2 sentences in the story. Some of it you've touched on. 22 Canadian diplomats were fired last year for fraud, theft, embezzlement, soliciting kickbacks, and other wrongdoing, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs figures. And then here are those 4 words, Franco. No police were called. Hang on, embezzling, selling interest. Like what they're doing is, like, we don't have the details here, but maybe it's selling a citizenship visa or like a path to citizenship. Maybe it's, you know, a kickback for a contract. Those are serious offenses that typically in the private sector, the cops would be called. But the private sector, you know, theft is more important than PR. Here, PR rules. Imagine 22 serious crimes, and they just didn't call the police, Franco. That's crazy to me.
Well, you know, I hope what this reporting from Blacklocks does is really kick off further, I don't know how to say, further auditing within the House of Commons, right, Ezra? Like, you'll kind of remember how the ArriveCan story, how that developed into a national scandal, where there was initial reports of the app ballooning somehow to $54 million, and then members of Parliament in the House of Commons, other people, other journalists just kept smashing some of the records around ArriveCan. And eventually it became a national scandal. So I'm really hoping that that's what can happen when it comes to Global Affairs Canada, right? Because this is one of the worst waste offenders in the entire government. You know, Ezra, I mentioned off the top that you had 22 Canadian diplomats who were fired. But you know what my first thought was? Is why aren't more bureaucrats at Global Affairs Canada being fired, right? Who are the bureaucrats who decided to spend $8,800 on a sex toy show in Germany? Right. Who are they? And why aren't they fired? right? Who are the bureaucrats who decided to spend 12 grand on a show where senior citizens in other countries could talk about their sex lives in front of live audiences? Who are those bureaucrats, and why aren't they fired? How about the bureaucrats at Global Affairs who's approving $51,000 a month on booze? Who are those bureaucrats, and why aren't they fired? Right? So I hope what this reporting can do from Blacklocks is put a spotlight on some of the stuff going in that's happening at this department. And I hope our members of parliament can run with it and continue to dive into the wasteful details.
Franco is absolutely on fire here. It's a pleasure to see. Hey, you know what? I have a theory for you. And again, I'm not being partisan here, but I remember when Stephen Harper was in office, and his foreign trips often were cut short, as in they didn't stay an extra night. They would fly home at night just to avoid staying in a fancy hotel. Like Stephen Harper's entire foreign affairs style was to really limit chances for, oh, why did you stay an $800 a night hotel kind of thing. He literally came back to, like, he would rather get on the plane and come home than risk that. That was his style. Remember, that was when Bev Oda was sacked for a $16 room service orange juice. Well, what kind of example have we had for 10 years? And now Mark Carney having 600 conflicts of interest. I think what I'm saying is a fish rots from the head down. Leadership starts at the top. So if you've got a penny pinching Scottish accountant in the form of Stephen Harper, who's making who's making an example by being frugal, versus the billionaire oligarch Mark Carney, who refuses to divest, or Anita Anand's husband, who just happens to be involved in so many government contracts. I think people get the message, which is get while the getting's good, and as long as you get away with it, you're fine. And if you're caught, no big deal. The police won't be called. I think this is a moral example that comes from the top.
Well, Ezra, first, I just want to say, look, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're filing access to information requests every time Carney goes on a trip overseas, right? So we're going to be getting all those records in, and we're going to be exposing what type of spending the Carney government is undertaking. But, you know, your point about the Trudeau government, and it's just massively wasteful and extravagant spending overseas. Like, look, and we all remember who it was who billed us taxpayers $6,000 per night hotel suite during the Queen's funeral in London, England. It was the Right Honorable Justin Trudeau. Yeah. Or how about the time that he spent $61,000 on a 2-day star-studded conference? What was the conference about? In Manhattan, by the way, fighting poverty. You know, so Trudeau was fighting poverty the only way he knew how, with selfies and room service. So we've seen so much extravagant waste over the last decade or so. It's getting out of hand. But Ezra, let's look at the big picture here, and let's just expand all of the foreign aid. Okay, the government spent $11 billion on foreign aid in 2023-24. $11 billion on foreign aid. Ezra, I went through the departments, okay? In that same year, the government spent $6 billion through the entire Department of Veterans Affairs.
Wow.
$11 billion for foreign aid, $6 billion through Veterans Affairs. Almost double on foreign aid as what the government was spending through Veterans Affairs. Let that sink in.